Okay, so if you thought this week's chapter was long, you're not alone. And next week's is a bit longer.
Yeah.
Um,
We're doing two.
and we have two. And that will bring us to the completion of Bonhoeffer next week. So next Thursday is our last meeting. We'll take a break and reconvene in a few weeks, probably after Easter. But we'll wait and see on that. All right, so let's begin. Bonhoeffer talks about the church in chapters 11 and 12, breaking it up into the visible community, and then the big chapter for next week is the chapter on the saints, chapter 12. So, but next week, 12 and 13, finish the book, and we'll wrap this book up. And I have to tell you, I have colleagues at Point University who are very impressed with you guys. You've read The Day the Revolution Began.
Mhm.
You've read The Blue Parakeet. You've read Life Together, and now you've read Discipleship. So for what it means, for whatever it means to you, they are impressed. So take that for the whatever it would get you, which is nothing. But just know that there are people in my life that are impressed that I'm that you folks are reading this stuff. So
Did we get a degree?
Wondering.
you have to take out and repay student loans in order to do that.
98.
I don't think so.
If you'd like to pay some of mine, we can talk later. I guess in a way you are. But anyway, all right. So let's begin. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I got 9 bullet points here, and I'm sure you guys are going to bring some stuff here. I have to admit to you, as I was reading this last night at 1:30, 1:45, or this morning, I woke up, I couldn't sleep, so I thought, hey, let's go ahead and read it. He kept making his point, and about 10 pages from the end of the chapter, I said, all right, you've already said that. 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 He got preachy. He got a little evangelical here and just kept repeating the same thing, making sure that we heard it. But he did say some very interesting things in this chapter. I want to begin with this quote. He says, "The incarnate Son of God needs not only ears or hearts, but living people who will follow him. That is why he called his disciples into a literal bodily following, and thus made his fellowship with them a visible reality." They had the reality of the Jesus in the flesh. It would not have been enough for him to walk by Peter and Simon and James and John and say, hey, I'm going to give you this book. We're going to meet at the synagogue once a week, and we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to teach you. He had to have them walking with him, and it helps to explain kind of the radical departure of these disciples as they left their nets, and in the case of James and John, left their poor daddy and their nets and followed him. So in the following, it made it a visible reality to him. It had to be literal, it had to be bodily, because the Son of God was literal and bodily. So that's kind of the way that Bonhoeffer opens up the discussion. And I think it does show a distinction, at least for me, it shows a distinction between those apostles and the rest of us. I think we're men and women just like them. But they were the ones who got to follow Jesus for at least 3 years. And sit under his teaching and watch him live his life and die his death. And of course, be raised. So,
Future.
important. All right. The second thing, Bonhoeffer says the apostles and the prophets are the foundation on which the church is built, while the cornerstone is Jesus Christ. So again, I recall the scene in Revelation where we're told that let me see, let me get this right, and I know all you Bible scholars will help me on this one. In the New Jerusalem, the foundations have the names of the 12 apostles, and I believe the gates have the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, showing the continuity and the togetherness of the Old Testament and the New Testament. But they are the foundation on which the church is built. But of course, the cornerstone is Jesus. I don't know if you've ever taken time to go outside in the front of the church, because most of us come in the back and very rarely go out what used to be the front. But have you ever seen the cornerstone on the corner of the building? The slab in the corner of the building. Well, take time one day when you're here to go out the front steps and check it out. It's really neat. But Jesus is the cornerstone, the living incarnate Word. So we want to make that one. So okay. So Bonhoeffer moves into this. He says the Word of God seeks a church to take unto itself. And that's us. That's where we come in. And then he spends about 20 pages talking about life in that. And he uses Paul quite a bit. Romans 13, I believe. Quite a bit on Romans 13, which I thought would provide some food for fodder, especially his comments on slaves. Could provide some food. All right. So here is the next thing. He says, preaching is not the only means whereby the church takes visible form. That is also done by the sacraments of baptism and the Lord's Supper, both of which flow from the true humanity of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, for me, what this said was, I know that sometimes we get a little twitchy when we talk about especially the Lord's Supper, when we talk about the body and the blood, and we've developed kind of anti-transubstantiation language to talk about, anti-Roman Catholic language to talk about the body and the blood when we take it, that it doesn't literally become the body and the blood as most Roman Catholics believe. Not all, but most, and many Anglicans do as well. But that this is the visible form of the body of Jesus does come in baptism and the Lord's Supper, and they do flow from the true humanity of Jesus. These come. Remember, he's the one that sat down at the table that night and said, "Take, eat. This is my body, which is given for you." He didn't say this represents my body. He said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And then he said, "This cup doesn't represent my blood." He said, "This cup is my blood of the covenant of the New Testament." And I'm not trying to convince you that transubstantiation is real, but in some mystical sense, when we partake of the little chiclet and which, by the way, the last 3 Sundays I've had the opportunity to I've been a part of the deaconess crew here at the church, and I've been able to and all that. And I didn't make much of a mess, did I,
You
Carol?
didn't make any mess.
Hey, but it wasn't lost on me. It wasn't lost on me what I was handling. I mean, this is not just a little piece of bread and a little shot of grape juice. This is, yesterday I went to St. Barnabas. It was the feast of St. Matthias. I love Matthias. We only hear about him in one place in the Bible, Acts chapter 1. He's the one that takes the traitor Judas's place, as the collect says. And so Matthias is the only time we hear about him, but it was his feast day yesterday. So I went and I had, it's just really something to have the priest place that cup, that piece of bread in your hand. They're not doing the cup right now because of COVID, but to have him place that piece of bread, you don't chew it. Sharon, you'll be familiar with this. You don't chew it. You put it on your tongue and it dissolves. And to me, it's just really, really something. And it speaks of, and I think Bonhoeffer would agree, being a good Lutheran, that this flows from Jesus. I don't mind the talk of, I don't mind it so much. This is, this represents or whatever. But Jesus' own words, the two times he talked about the Lord's Supper, he's two things he said. He said, this is my body, this is my blood. And then he said, for my body is true food and my blood is true drink, in the Gospel of John. So, there's a lot more going on than just, and I hope we all sense that when we take the Lord's Supper. And we're disciples. This is one of our cornerstones. We take it every week, man. And
I think that
go ahead, Sharon.
the grape juice and the little wafer of communion, they start out as just that wafer and grape juice.
Absolutely.
But whenever the words of God are spoken over them, then they don't become body or flesh or that, but they're in those same words that you mentioned, they become part of him, because in those days also, bread and wine were basic elements of their culture. I mean, they didn't even drink water as often because it had to be clean water, and they didn't always have clean water.
Yeah, right.
So the wine and the bread were the basic elements of their lives.
That's right. That's right. And I want to point out that trend because the Hebrew, remember Jesus spoke Aramaic, of course he spoke Hebrew and Greek as well. But the Bible was written in basic Hebrew. The Hebrew that we read is not elevated. It's called biblical Hebrew, but it's not elevated Hebrew. It is the Greek that the New Testament is written in is Koine Greek, which is common Greek, which is a whole lot easier to read than the classic Greek that you encounter in like Homer and others, Plato and others. And the classical Greek is, oh mercy. But Koine Greek is the speech of the common people. And this stretches over into when King Jimmy over in England, the King James Version of the Bible. We love the language, don't we? Beautiful. I do. I think it's beautiful. Having had so much time in it now, I enjoy it. It was common speech of its day. It was written in the common tongue. We think of it as elevated, and because we don't talk like that, but they did. In 1611, they talked like that. If you just sit down one day and read some Shakespeare and read the King James Bible, you're going to see that it's tougher in some spots to read Shakespeare than it is, or read the Canterbury Tales, something like that. A lot more difficult to read than, say, Psalm 23. So, but it's all that common elements. But those, as you were saying, Sharon, when it's intoned by the elder, when the elder presides over it, the words of institution are spoken over it. Up in the baptistry, we're talking so much about Lord's Supper because, well, I am. But we're talking about the baptistry. That's just a tank of water up there. It really is. Down here, it was a tank of water in the floor. Okay? But when we get into it and speak the words and do the action of baptism, it's not just a tank of water anymore. It really is, but it's common elements, like you said. So yeah, I think that's good. And they flow from the humanity of Jesus. And I think that's important for us to remember. All right, let's move the discussion to the church. How do we do this? Bonhoeffer says that church order is divine, both in origin and character. Though, of course, it is meant to serve and not to rule. Remember that conversation? Yeah, I think Bonhoeffer mentions that Jesus has with his disciples close to the end. He says, how the lords of the day lord things over other people? Well, that's not how it's supposed to be with you. He says, you guys are supposed to be among one another as those who serve. You're supposed to be in the world. The whole phrase, I think it's Paul that had that, in the world, but not, or maybe Jesus. It's in the New Testament somewhere. in the world, but not of the world, you know. We are ones that serve. We are among everyone else as ones who serve. And so church order should flow from service more than trying to rule. Now, got to have bylaws, got to have rules, got to have, you know, whatever. But it's supposed to come from a position of service and serving more than ruling or lording over. And that's a different look at leadership. And I think that's important for the minister, the pastor. It's important for the elders. And look, I've seen this in churches, and I've seen it in my own heart, where I get it mixed up sometimes, and I feel like I'm, you know, got to rule, you know. But that's not where Christian leadership comes from. That's not where it has its origin. Look at the cross, Jesus says. This is where, look at me washing the feet of the apostles, even Judas' feet on the night before his betrayal. This is what church leadership looks like right here, the service. So, and Bonhoeffer concurs. And that order should flow from that. I'm sorry, I haven't stopped yet. Is there anything, I'm about halfway. Anything from that or thus far in the chapter that you would like to bring out? Anybody? And everybody's unmuted unless you muted yourself. So you can have that if you would like. Is there anything else so far? Okay. All right. All right. Well, let's move on to the next. Oh, this is good. It's not always easy to see where a legitimate school of thought ends and heresy begins. Yeah. That is why a doctrine may be tolerated in one church and prescribed as heresy in another. Can you think of any doctrines today that are, well, let's do it like this. Let's do it like this. Let's shine the light on you. What is one doctrine that we what is one doctrine that we tolerate but might be considered heresy in another church? Just think about it. You know, we'll just play his game here.
Women elders.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Good one.
or women in leadership.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, women in leadership period, but particularly women elders. Yep.
Yes, that's
Yep.
true.
All
Women-
inclusive.
Women preachers.
Women teaching men in classes too.
Women teaching men in classes. Yes. Yeah, so New Hope softened on that quite a while ago. It wasn't without a fight, I'm sure. But in other churches around us, that's just not happening. Yeah.
Well, it really wasn't that big a fight at New Hope.
Wasn't really. I'm glad to hear that, brother. That's good.
It probably wasn't a big fight because you had more women serving than men serving, so.
I wasn't going to say that.
We had one guy who made a big deal out of it.
Okay. But other than that, everybody was pretty much on board.
Great.
That's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. But yeah. But, you know, if you go over to Midway Christian Church, where I was baptized and grew up, very small church. It's an independent Christian church. There will be, you look up on Sunday mornings, there will be men around the table. There will be a man in the pulpit. And the only thing the women are doing is preparing the communion and bringing it up from upstairs. That's, and they're doing other stuff too, but they don't have a role, but that's what I mean. So yeah, Hoyt, I think that's right. I think that's good. Can anybody think of any other before we move on? Is there anything that now, let me flip the question. What are, now remember, doctrines. What are some doctrines that maybe are tolerated in somewhere else that we might consider heresy here, whether it actually is or not?
All inclusiveness.
Yeah.
Okay. All inclusive.
Immersion.
Yeah,
There you
immersion.
go.
Oh, here we go again. There you go. No, that's immersion baptism. If you're not immersed, there was a time where here, according to the bylaws, you need to be immersed. Now, the other one, the inclusiveness, yeah, the opening of the doors to all people, regardless of whether being baptized or not, and disregarding orientation, specifically sexual orientation. Yeah. Many of the disciple churches have blown the doors open on that quite a while ago. This is no secret here. I mean, this has been quite a while ago. That we have several open and affirming congregations in our region now. There are some churches that are open and affirming, but they're not open about their being open and affirming.
Got it. Mhm.
There are a lot of those. Okay, there are a lot of those. Okay, but there are some that have officially come out, and I'm not calling them out just to rat them out. It's public. The First Christian of Decatur is definitely open and affirming. First Christian
But
Atlanta
Atlanta
is
is
heading
too.
toward being
Yeah.
open and affirming. So yeah, they're just two of several. I imagine Cherry Log is as well up in Cherry Log. So anyway, all right. So let's move on. To allow a baptized brother, I'll say brother or sister, to allow a baptized brother or sister to take part in the worship of the church, but to refuse to have anything to do with him in everyday life is to subject him or her to abuse and contempt. Now, here's where he's gone to meddling. Bonhoeffer has gone to meddling. I happen to know I'm a chief meddler. But it's true. We still struggle with sometimes some people will not have anything to do with maybe poorer members of the church, or for whatever reason, there's this disconnect come when the chimes ring and it's time to go to lunch on Sunday. The basic thing here is that our faith is just kind of consolidated into things that we do here, but then the rest of our life has absolutely nothing with that. And one of the ways that manifests itself, Bonhoeffer says, is to neglect one of our brothers and sisters. Every time I saw Keith walking on the street, I'm just using him as an example. I did try to stop and say hello to him. Sometimes it wasn't possible. Sometimes he was walking a tightrope out here. Anybody that walks out here, I've got to give him, I pray for him.
Especially crossing Old Norcross.
But try to say hello to him. Try to speak to him. See him in stores and say hello. Keith, doesn't have to be Keith, just whoever. But his face immediately popped into my mind when I read that last night. It did. And I don't think that was an accident. And I sure hope he's doing okay.
He's doing okay.
Jan says he's
Talked to
doing
him last
okay.
night.
Talked to him last night. But that's one of the things. Go ahead, Sharon. Yeah. Oh, you said good. Okay. All right.
Good.
Yeah, we just got.
I'm glad you're keeping in touch with him because he won't call us anymore.
Right.
I think it's more he's keeping in touch with Jan, isn't it, Jan?
Yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah,
But if I don't hear from him in about 3 or 4 days, I'll give him a
Yeah,
call.
but we got a lifeline out to him, so that's good.
Good.
All right, that's
Good.
all. That's good. All right. So he also goes on to say the disciples had to leave everything and follow Jesus. Now we are told, let each man abide in the calling, or let each man or woman abide in the calling wherein they are called. That's Romans 13. That's we're not necessarily called to pick up and leave. Sometimes we do, but many times we are called to live out our faith right where we are and live it out in our vocation. There should be a difference in how a Christian does their business, does their job, does their way in the world. Yeah. So, and I think that's a lot of what Jesus is saying to us there. Yeah. And then finally, he says, in the world, the Christians are a colony of the true home. And, if you want to get a really good picture of this, read 1 Peter. Won't take you long. 5 chapters. Very, very, very short. But Peter focuses on this really, really, really well. The Christians are a colony of the true home. They are strangers and aliens in a foreign land, obeying its laws and honoring its government. Now, what's interesting about Paul, Peter, John, Ringo, George, the Roman Empire was the government. And we know that Paul was repeatedly imprisoned. For what? Disobeying the government, disobeying the elected authorities, disobeying the laws put in place. So I think there is a good conversation that we can have about honoring the government, but knowing when.
Not to.
Remember that Peter and James and John standing before the Pharisees, and they look at them and they say, and this was a type of government, okay? These Pharisees, Sanhedrin, they could have them at least stoned. They could, and they did. They tell them, stop preaching in the name of Jesus. And that was a directive. That was a law to them. Stop preaching in the name of Jesus. You remember what they said? Well, you do what you've got to do. We got to decide whether we need to obey God or obey man. So, and that's not much of a decision for us. So do what you have to do to us, but we're not going to stop. Okay. The early Christian church had the hallmark of not professing Caesar as Lord. And they paid the price. Dietrich Bonhoeffer is an example of a martyr who said no to the government. So we need to deepen our thinking about what it means to honor the government. What Paul means when he says be subject to the government. I think what he means is instead of those, there will come that moment where you have to make a decision between Christ and what the world wants you to do. But I think what Paul means is that, before we get to that, live a life that is so quiet and in such submission and when I say quiet, I don't mean mealy or, whatever. I just mean just live a good life, be a good citizen. Paul says, pay your taxes. Jesus said, pay your taxes, but when it comes time, you'll have to make a decision between the world and Christ. And you will have to disobey at some point, more than likely. And so I think the discussion about honoring the government is a little bit more complex than, a senator pulling it out on television and reading it, for the world to hear, I think it's a little bit deeper than that. I really do. So, okay. So, and Bonhoeffer paid with his life for civil disobedience. And he wasn't alone. But he decided that it was better to follow Christ and save Jews. Gosh, I've got to share this with you, Jan. Jan and I are reading this book by this Orthodox fellow. His last name is Forrest, called The Ladder of the Beatitudes. And I just wanted to share this story with you. I forget the lady. It was a story about a lady who was arrested. She was helping Jews, and she had a father with her as well, a priest with her as well, who was.
Can you speak up?
Sure. Move the microphone down. So, the father was arrested. She was arrested. There was a son who was also arrested, and he was killed early by the Jews. The father was brought before, and I can imagine the scene in first century
Back up.
Rome.
He was killed by the Nazis, not the Jews.
Oh, he was killed by the Nazis. I'm sorry. Not, of course, not the Jews, but he was killed for helping the Jews. Okay. So the father is brought in for questioning, and he's wearing a crucifix. And the guy says, look, all you got to do is stop helping Jews. We'll let you go. He says, can you do that? And he looks right at the guy and says, I cannot forsake my Christian duty to the Jews. And he gets slapped right across the face. And then after he composes himself, he gets another opportunity. He gets another opportunity to present himself, and I'm not remembering all of the details. But the guy basically says, how dare you call your Christian duty any way to help these Jews? He takes his crucifix and picks it up and shows it to the guy and said, do you know this Jew? And he knocked him to the floor.
Wow.
Of course, the father was later, the priest was later executed, and so was the other worker, Mother Maria. Mother Maria, yeah. So it's a great book, and the example here was, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So that's one of the things. When does our hunger and thirst for righteousness supersede our obligation to obey the governments of the world, even our own? So that's something that Bonhoeffer very interested in, and we know how his life ended. So, okay.
What was the name of that again, James?
The Ladder of the Beatitudes, and the last name of the author is Forrest. I believe it's James Forrest.
Yes.
Yeah, James Forrest. It's a very good read, and we're in the middle of it right now. So, yeah, good stuff. Okay. All right. Well, this is it. Any other comments or anything else today? Y'all good? We'll get y'all to lunch early. Yes, sir. Go ahead. Okay.
On page 216,
Yeah, man.
in the bottom paragraph, I won't read the whole preceding part, but it says, rather, any baptized person receives as unrestricted privilege to participate in all areas of the communal life of the members of the body of Christ. Is this him taking a swipe at the Catholic Church, not allowing other Christians to have communion?
I imagine so. Yes. I would imagine so. Yeah, because the Lutherans had solved that. And they offered it to all. But keep in mind, communion was offered to baptized Christians. It wasn't an open table. I mean, we need to remember that. At this point, the Lutherans, it was still, and I understand when I go, I do, but I don't understand. If I ever go into a Roman Catholic service, I don't understand why I'm not allowed to partake of the body and the blood. I do understand. I understand theologically what they're getting at. Okay. But I'm bothered by it. And Alexander Campbell was bothered by that mess too. And that's why he broke off, and we have our church, there you go. Go ahead.
When I was growing up, my father emphasized that as we went from different church to different church because of the Navy,
Yes.
that I should not take communion unless I was a member of that church.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, as I have been to Catholic Mass where I have been invited to partake.
So have I. The Ignatians served me when I went on a silent retreat. I was shocked. They said, no, I put my hands across my heart for a blessing. And they said, no, put your hands up. And I was kind of stunned by that. Yeah. So
In the church that I grew up in, we were not allowed to partake of communion until we were baptized.
right.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Hoyt. Then Hinton, I know you want to say.
Some of the Baptist churches, when I was much younger, would only allow you to take communion if you were a member of that particular Baptist church.
Right.
Mhm.
And one thing to jump on that, and Hinton will close this out. Just to show you how kind of sectarian the churches can be, this would have been considered a disciples church up in East Tennessee that Fred Brennan Craddock preached at in his early days. And he said that there were some people up there who were working at a plant in Tennessee, and I forget the name of it, but it was big. I guess after the war, it was an area where people were moving in, there were mobile homes, and there was laundry everywhere. Just not the kind of people that you would want to, you know. So he said, look, we need to evangelize these folks. We need to bring the gospel to them. And in the church board meeting, somebody said, the head elder said, well, I don't know about that. And then, so the upshot was that a week later, they had a meeting to where it was said, and this jumps onto Hinton's point, Hoyt's point. I get y'all mixed up. Sorry.
I can understand.
We look so much
I
alike.
apologize to both of y'all. I apologize to both of y'all. Equal opportunity. The upshot was they had a meeting the next week at the church. They said only those people who own land in the county where the church was only could be members
Oh
of
my,
that church.
wow.
Well, let me finish this story. He said that later on he was taking Nettie back. Nettie's his wife. He said it was taking Nettie back to some of his early failures. And he went back and went looking for that church, and he found it. And there it was, beautiful white building. But he said outside was a sign: barbecue, ribs, chicken, and pork, all you can eat. So he said, well, we were hungry, so we said, well, let's eat. So he said they went in. He said they opened the doors. He said, and there were tables everywhere, people everywhere. Those plastic tables with the chairs, kind of, you know. He said, and the pews had been pushed back to the wall for people to wait to be seated. And he said the old beautiful pump organ was over on the side that was still there. And he said, and the food was really good. And he sat down at a table and he said, I looked at old Nettie and said, you know, it's a good thing this place isn't a church anymore. These people wouldn't be welcome here.
Yeah,
What he said.
yeah.
So it speaks to what, you know, churches can be, they can be something.
They can turn
They
people
be something.
away.
So
We-
let me close this off. Hinton, let me get Hinton, and then Hoyt will let you go ahead.
I was just going to say that a part of the
Don't talk over you, brother.
problem that we're going through as a nation
Yes, sir.
is that we have a lot of folks who have a difficult time accepting that the country as it is now is not the country in which they grew up in.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's.
And so uh,
Right history.
the more brown and black we have, the more acceptance of LGBT people,
Yeah.
the more of that, then for some people, the more resistance they get, the more angry they are that the country is changing to a country that's not in quote the way it was founded, you know.
Sure, right.
That's a lot of our problem. I did want to say that on page 214
Yeah, man.
in the second paragraph
Yes, sir.
where he uses the word Lebensraum,
Oh, yes.
was used by the Nazi government as a rationale for invading Poland, Ukraine, and all of those Eastern countries. They would have more, they needed the living space.
They needed the living space. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. We'll rationalize anything, won't we? My goodness. Hinton,
true.
you are up, sir.
I was looking at page 229.
229.
About the second paragraph, and it says, to the first Christians, the world still granted a space in which they were able to feed and clothe themselves from the fruits of their own labor. A world that has become entirely anti-Christian, however, can no longer grant Christians even this private sphere in which they pursue their personal work and earn their daily bread. It feels compelled to force Christians to deny their Lord in exchange for every piece of bread they want to eat. In the end, Christians are thus left with no other choice but to escape from the world or to go to prison. But when they have been deprived of their last inch of space here on earth, the end will be near.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're headed right there.
Okay. Okay.
I think we're very close to it right now.
Yeah, there's a lot here. There's a lot here, definitely. Bonhoeffer speaking about the anti-Christian sentiment of the world. And it's not even anti all Christians. It is a particular brand of Christian. And that's another conversation that we can have for another time. But it is. It definitely looks like it. It really does. And of course, every day, Lord, we Maranatha, we say, come. It could be any day. So, yeah, that's good. Thank you. Anyone else today before we go?
I noticed that he used that Philippians 4:12 that you say is incorrect. So what'd you think of that?
Philippians 4:12. What's
Where
that?
is that, Peggy?
I can do all things through Christ, through the one who empowers me.
Wow.
Page 231.
I just don't think that football teams should put that on their.
Oh, well, yeah.
I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Well, again, I know it's bothersome to start with its original context, but Paul is talking about, I have learned to be content. He says, let's read what came before it. I have learned to be content in whatever state I'm in. And he's writing this from jail. He says, I've learned to be content with food or without, drink or without, clothes or without. I don't let that stuff bother me. He says, but I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So there is this release of dependency upon, and a lot of people say that happiness depends on happenings, what's going on around us, and we're happy. But then Paul he would have struggled with it a little bit, but not to the extent that we do. And that he had learned to be in a place in life where he was so in the cradle, or let me use a biblical phrase. He was so comfortable in the bosom of Abraham that whatever condition he was in, whether he was being beaten, prison, or if things were good, if he was hanging out with Romans, hey, it was good.
It frustrates me
Yeah.
in that people equate the words joy, happiness, and contentment to be the same meaning, and they are not.
No, they're not.
That's true.
They're not.
That's true.
Be content. Paul says he's learned contentment. And so then he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So once we've settled that, then if we can make application from that and pull something apart, yeah, I think so. I think that's good.
That's encouraging.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the most encouraging verses in the Bible, especially if you're having a difficult time, for sure. It's good. All right, folks. Next week, it's more reading, but oh, you're welcome. It's more reading, but it's the end. So we'll meet next Thursday, Lord willing, at 11 o'clock and finish this book, guys. Hang in there. You're doing great.
Yeah, that's what Hinton said. The end is near.
That's what Hinton said. The end is near. Maranatha, folks. We'll see y'all later.
Maranatha.
Bye-bye.
Bye. God bless.